So this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, it is. I wanted to actually bring it up with you, Carl, right? Because I watched you and Zuby, and I watched a conversation between you and Zuby, which there were some things that I disagreed on. You were talking about white supremacy, you were talking about white privilege. And I think that when it comes to white supremacy and white privilege, I think that a lot of people are confused about what it is.
Okay.
And sometimes it is rubbished. And there's like a theme that I have that it's schizophrenic and bipolar at the same time. So white supremacy, white privilege, whatever you want to call it, racism, blah, 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 is kind of schizophrenic and bipolar at the same time, which is why we are constantly talking about it and also constantly confused about it.
Okay, lay out the thesis then.
So the thesis of what I saw, let's talk about what happened on the podcast. So you said, no, it might have been Zuby actually. Let me see. Zuby said, no, you said that the term white supremacy is predicated on the fact that white people are better than others.
Yeah, that to be a white supremacist, you have to think that, right?
Right. So my thing is, as human beings, we're all equal, right? No one is better than anybody else. However, white supremacy are actions, not so much what people think. So if I give you an example, right, I'm going to read a quote, right? And it says, we bled Africa for 4.5 centuries. We looted their raw materials. Then we told lies that the Africans were good for nothing. In the name of religion, we destroyed their culture. And after being made rich at their expense, we now steal their brains through miseducation and propaganda to prevent them from enacting black retribution against us. Who do you think said that?
Martin Luther King?
No.
I don't know.
President Jacques Chirac of France, who served 3 terms, I think, at least 3 terms. Mm-hmm. So
when he said that, just out of interest,
well, after serving his terms in office, so it was after he's seen certain things that I'm not privy to, you're not privy to.
I'm thinking about the Algerian War of Independence. Yeah.
Say again.
I'm thinking about the Algerian War of Independence.
What, when he would have said it?
Yeah, because I'm thinking the French basically had to admit, we don't goofed big time with the Algerians, if no one else.
And the French still are as well.
Well, this is the thing. So this is why I talk about the reason why I think white supremacy is confusing. Because what it is what President Jacques Chirac said. What it isn't is what the wokies and the lefties are always talking about. Oh, everybody never got a job because it's white supremacy. I don't think that's what it is. I think my thing is white supremacy needs to be called out where it does exist and not rubbished, because what happens is it kind of negates what it is, basically. It negates what it is.
So are you saying that white supremacy primarily exists in the realm of geopolitical events?
A lot of it does.
Right.
A lot of it does. And because my thing about from studying what white supremacy is, right? So I always have a little experiment. So I would say to you, are you racist?
I don't consider myself to be.
Right. I would say, that's fine, by the way. I would say, do you know any racist people?
No. Not to my knowledge,
that?
Right.
Right, okay. So you don't know any racist people. Do you believe racist people exist?
Well, no, actually, okay. I do know of people who are self-avowed racists, yes.
Right. So do you believe racist people exist?
Yeah.
So what happens when I ask that question to generally to white people is that they say the same things generally. They say, oh, I'm not racist and I'm not around racists. And I'm like, okay, cool. But do you think racist people exist? And they say, yeah. And I say, well, where are they then? Right? So it's like white supremacy or racism becomes this mythological creature that everybody speaks about and admits it exists, but no one knows where it is.
I think the issue is the term racist has become synonymous with the term bad. Right. So essentially, when you say, are you a racist? What you're saying to the person is, are you a bad person? And of course, no one really thinks of themselves as a bad person. And so everyone says, no, everyone around me is a good person, therefore a non-racist. Because it seems to be that racism is taken to mean many things, but one of those things being a sort of personal intolerance of people of other races. But of course, I don't see any of that around. But then it gets abstracted into broad categorical views of civilizations. And so it occupies many layers at the same time. And so someone always takes it on the personal level as you've introduced it there and says, well, I don't find myself irrationally hating people of other races,
Right.
so I'm not a racist.
Right.
But then conversely, you've put it in the realm of geopolitical events. So it's sort of disconnected from them. So like you say, it is kind of abstracted away and it's sort of mythological. So everyone's just like, I don't know
what it is. It exists and it doesn't exist. And so
hi folks, sorry to interrupt the video, but I wanted to let you know that we've introduced a feature on the website that allows you to purchase individual videos. So if you go over to lotus.com and see a piece of premium content that you really want to watch, you can pay for it and it is yours forever.
When President like Jack Chirac says that, I don't know if you know who Arinkana Chimhambori Quo is.
I don't.
She's a former ambassador to the African Union.
Right.
So she worked for the African Union. She no longer works there. And she speaks a lot about what the French done, right? And Jack Chirac's already said that this is what they've done. And Arinkana Chimhambori Quo says that during the 1950s, and you can actually research this, that a pact to recolonize Africa was enacted by the French to the Francophone countries. And there were two countries that said no. There was Mali and there was Guinea. So Mali and Guinea said, no, we're not going to sign that pact. And then what the French proceeded to do was to pour concrete into the sewage systems of Mali and Guinea, right? And just leave. And it's like, okay, but the French haven't had any retribution or any punishment for that type of crime against humanity. If we done it in London, if the Chinese decided to pour concrete in London, the sewage system, it's an act of war. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's like, what happens is people they downplay what white supremacy actually is and what they do is that they replace it with things that, oh, this thing is too white. Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, no, that's not what white supremacy is. That's what white supremacy is and not that.
If anything, it makes talking about white supremacy in European countries a bit redundant, right?
Go on.
Because geopolitically, the Europeans aren't doing things to themselves, but they are going over to Africa and doing whatever. Like the French have got a weird thing with the currency in North Africa at the moment, where it's essentially dependent on the economic situation in France.
They print the money of Africa.
And you definitely could make an argument that, I mean, white supremacy, I think, is a terrible term to use for anything because it's just inherently divisive, even if it is descriptive. But like,
why do you say it's divisive?
Well, because people feel like they're being attacked for being a racist when you say it. But you are trying to describe a series of events.
Yes.
Right? So that immediately puts people on the back foot. But if you would say, well, look, giving this specific example of France and the currency in like wherever, Guinea-Bissau, wherever it was, if you'd say, well, look, European interference is hamstringing the economy of this country, then suddenly a person isn't like, oh, I'm not a racist, because that's a true statement. That's not a statement about them.
Right.
And so then you could talk about that event and how that's unfair. Right.
Of course.
That's a post-colonial exploitation of an African country. And you absolutely could talk about that in clear terms that people aren't going to get their back up about. You know, because that's the thing. Is I think the problem with the using terms like white supremacy is it comes with a judgment against the person that you're using it, and not you personally, but you know, the other person that's being used against. And it just prevents any meaningful and constructive dialogue from being done. Right?
So, and that's why I wanted to talk about it, because I think that it needs to be highlighted with what it actually is, and because we know what it isn't. I think we know, like, when people start speaking about, they never got a job, white supremacy, it's like, shut up, like be quiet, like that's not what white supremacy is, right? And so it's like, but when it is what it is, I think it should be spoken about. Like, for instance, I was watching a TV show the other day talking about William Wilberforce, right? And William Wilberforce and Great Britain, you know, saying, no, we abolished slavery, 1807, right? So in 1807, the British abolished slavery. Would you say that's a good thing?
I would say so.
So would I, right? So
it's hard to disagree.
no, but you laugh, right? Yeah. But this is what I'm talking about, what white supremacy actually is, because I talk about the bipolar and schizophrenic nature of it. So 1807, we abolished slavery.
And we abolished the trade in 1807.
We abolished the trade.
And it was slavery was 1833.
1833. So 1807, the trade, 1833. So if we go to 1833, when they said absolutely nothing, right? You know what the Berlin Conference is?
Not offhand.
The Berlin Conference is a conference where 13 European nations, you had the Ottoman Empire, which isn't European, but you had France, Germany, Spain,
Well, the colonial
Norway,
powers.
the
Is this
colonial
the
powers.
scramble for Africa?
and they scrambled for Africa.
Yeah.
But I would say that you just re-enslaved people. So you can't abolish slavery and then re-enslave a continent.
I think
That's for me, that's the schizophrenic bipolar nature of what it is. Because if I say I no longer have a problem with you, I don't have a problem with you, and I've been historically hurting you and your family, and I stop, you might say, thank you very much, Sarah, don't do that. But then if two weeks later I get all my guys and I kick your door down and I take over your house, you're like, whoa, I thought you stopped messing with me. Yeah.
I think the issue is that there is a distinction between like what an individual suffers and then the political context of international politics, right? So I agree that on an international level, it could be characterized that imperium, as in one group over another group, could be characterized as a form of slavery, but in a technical sense, it's actually not slavery, because what it is essentially vassalage. Like, how to describe it? Like, just the sort of thing that Russia is trying to do with Ukraine, right? It's not going to literally enslave Ukrainians, but it is going to put them within the political power of Russia.
I mean, you say that, but during colonization, that's exactly what happened. On the land, King Leopold of Belgium done it. He enslaved the people of the Congo and got them to get rubber. Cecil Rhodes done it to people in South Africa. You actually literally enslaved people.
Sometimes.
Right. But you can't say it's not the same.
No. Well, I'm not. It's sometimes, but there are other cases where it's not. For example, in Uganda, what we did is we had them as a protectorate. And so we took the largest ethnic group in Uganda and they had a king and we politically supported them. And so they were convivial.
Neo-colonialism.
Well, no, that was during the process of the scramble for Africa. And so there are particular places, but then there are other places where it's not that the people were necessarily saved. I mean, like Leopold is the worst example, probably, of that sort of thing happening. But then there are sort of various protectorates and administrations where the British run the place as they think it should be run, but the people aren't actually slaves.
I mean,
you're not wrong.
That sounds like a Disney version. If I'm honest, it sounds like a Disney version.
There are versions that you're talking about. Like, I'm not saying that Cecil Rhodes didn't do this.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Leopold didn't do this. It's just not the sum total of it. So, like,
sorry, go on. Let me finish.
But either way, it's not nice to have been conquered by someone else.
Right.
Either way. I mean, this is my primary desire for Brexit was simply to get out from under the heel of the French and the Germans.
Correct.
Right? And so even if you were on the sort of lighter side of the yoke of a foreign entity, it's still not good to be on it. Right. And you would prefer to be sovereign. Right?
Of course.
So, I mean, I'm not contesting that's not the case. But to say, right, that's all slavery. It allows people who want to challenge that, actually it gives them quite a break.
Broad.
Yeah.
Broad. Brush.
No, it gives them sort of a wedge in to prize that apart, right? Because they can say, yeah, well, okay, why are these black kingships flourishing so well under British protection and stuff like this? And so suddenly it's not that all Africans were enslaved by Europeans, even after the end of abolition of slavery.
I would say that the reason why those African kings were flourishing under British leadership is because with the scramble for Africa and with the scramble for the resources, they got a portion of it. So
they did.
So they benefited from all of this. Do you know what I mean? So, but essentially, when you scramble for Africa, like Jacques Chirac said, one of the things that he said in there is that they used religion. Now, I'm not religious. I'm not a religious person.
Either.
Do you know what I mean? I don't have a horse in the race, but I think that what white supremacy is, right? We know what it isn't. What it actually is I was raised a Christian, right? And I can read Revelation 1 verse 14. And I can see that Jesus Christ, who I don't believe in, was described as a man with burnt bronze skin and white woolen hair.
Okay.
That's not the image we get. The image if I was to Google Jesus Christ for you right now, be a blonde hair, blue-eyed dude, white skin, right? So I think that what white supremacy is being able, right, to see what someone's described as and be like, nah, I'll make him white. And then export that around the whole world.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's what white supremacy is.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, this has long been known. Like Aristotle was probably the first to say men make gods in their own image.
Yes.
Right. And so, gods from Europe look white, gods from Africa look black, gods from China look Chinese, etc., etc. And you are right that as a function of the power, the imperium of Europe over the rest of the world, of course, the things they believe flow outwards and across the world. That's obviously true. And so you could describe that as a form of white supremacy, but then I think that's why people aren't in favor of empires now.
Right. I don't believe empires are essentially bad. I believe that because empires are all right. Let me try and flesh that one out. Before people clip that.
I mean,
oh my god,
don't get me wrong. I'm not necessarily saying they are either, but I think that if we came back to it's never fun to be conquered by another people.
Yeah.
Then in a way it kind of is always bad.
So when I mean empire, I mean the building of your empire for your people, by your people, to make yourself great. Not at the extent of other people, if that makes sense. So that's what I don't think is bad. So if Great Britain built up Great Britain at the extent, not at the extent of other people, would be great. Empire, fantastic.
Within our island.
Within your island, it'd be great. Do you know what I mean? If Nigeria done the same thing, would be great. So that's why I think empire is great. What I don't think is great is when you export that empire to try and kill and harm and maim other people.
The problem is empires are defined by one ethnic group having dominion over
another.
So
unfortunately,
I wouldn't characterize what you're describing as empire. Yeah.
Nation.
Yeah, nation. Nation's a much better way of framing it, because that doesn't imply that you're conquering other people to get the resources. And I totally agree that
that's why I call myself a nationalist.
Yeah, well,
and I have done. I've called myself like a black nationalist. People, you made me black. No, I'm not trying to kill anyone.
Yeah, I just want to actually build something. Is that okay?
Help black people. Even if you look at my channels, to go back to my channel is kind of not dedicated, but there's a lot of videos on me telling black people, hey, stop being stupid. Stop doing the whole drill and drug dealing and whore culture type stuff and do better for ourselves, right? And a lot of the time, in my personal point of view, I've been called a quote unquote coon for that, right? Because to be black, in a lot of people's eyes, is to actually feed into that culture.
That is terrible, though, isn't it?
It's for me, it's ridiculous, right? Because I'm saying, listen, we can do better than that, right? But what I've noticed is that when you say, "Oh, I'm a national," I'm not about empire like you just described, but I'm about nation. Yeah, everyone's about their own people.
They should be.
They should be about their own people. Yeah. That's to me, that's not a problem.
But the thing is, all you're describing is wanting the best for the people that are, your family, your friends, your community, right? And why?
Right.
Who would be on the other side of this? And then, okay, well, what do you have to do to get the best for your things? Well, you have to build wealth. You have to build discipline. You have to work hard.
100%.
Demonstrate excellence.
100%.
And like you say, these are not like traits that are confined to any one race or community. Anyone can do this. And it's a choice. It is a conscious choice in your own head if you're going to pursue excellence or not. And I mean, as an outsider looking into the black community, I can see behaviors in the black community that are not
that are detrimental.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't want my own son. I wouldn't want my own son to behave in these ways.
Exactly. Neither would I.
And exactly. And so it's like, well, and what frustrates me is the politically correct class where they're like, "Oh, you're just a racist." It's like, no, actually, I'm suggesting that if this was my kid, I would pull him in and say, "Don't do this, son."
See, the thing, like I was saying to you before, the thing unfortunately, about the history of white people, the history of empire, Europe has had empires. They have gone out to conquer. And so it's harder for white people to say something factual, even though it may be factual, than it is for other people, because you're only saying that because you're a racist. That's why it's very easy for white people to get labeled a racist. I don't know if you are or you aren't. I don't, like, if you are, you are. If you're not, you're not. But what I'm saying is factual information to me is always going to be factual information. I don't care. Ben Shapiro famously
it's
said,
the truth.
Facts don't care about your feelings. Yeah. It is what it is. Do you know what I mean? So I just think it's harder, which is why I would say, if I'm thinking about it now, which is why a lot of white people are quite tentative to say certain things. They're scared to say certain things for fear of being viewed a certain way.
Totally. And and I think the stigma is not helping anyone at all. Because like you say, that normally it would be social pressure that stigmatizes certain kinds of behaviors. But if there's a certain group that you're not allowed to exert social pressure on, as in just criticism, say that's rubbish. Why are you doing that? You're going to end up with all these negative things. But if there's a barrier that says, no, you can't say that against those people because of the color of their skin, how does that help those people? How does that help those people change their behavior?
It doesn't. And I've said black people currently find themselves at the bottom of the social economic ladder globally. which is why, as somebody who's part of that quote unquote group, even though I'm an individual, I have to say to them, look, let's do better than that, right? If we find ourselves at the bottom, let's band together. And I think it's normal. Like I spoke to you last time, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, it's normal. People have got teams.
It's totally normal.
Build your team up.
Yeah.
Right? And then play
It's
the game.
totally
That's
normal.
it. Build your team up. Stop worrying about, because I actually saw the other day, it was on GB News. There was a lady, I forget her name, but she wears her hair, it's always slit down. Black lady. Slim. She was on GB News. Anyway.
Right, yeah.
But they were talking about the countryside and how it was too white, right? And how the countryside was too white.
Do you feel the countryside's too white?
And I was like, in my head, I was like, you're living in a majority white country.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to get places that a lot of white people are, right? So for you to attempt to, let's say, shame people for having their, I don't know, their alcoves, right, of whiteness doesn't make any sense to me. But I'm going to say something controversial.
We can clip out for YouTube.
No, it's fine. I'm going to say something controversial. The people that the black people for me that complain about racism and white supremacy all the time, are the black people that want to be let into parties that they just want to get into. Because it's like, look, the Russians are allowed to do their thing. The Chinese are allowed to do their thing. I'm not going to go into a Russian party and be like, not enough black people here, mate. Don't you think? You be like, it's a Russian party, brother. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So it's like the people that complain about it, for me, are the people that want to be let in and jig with the other people. And I'm like, you don't have to. You can build your own.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't mean you hate other people. And that's what I want to get across, actually. I think the problem comes with hate. I think that all peoples are allowed to be themselves.
Yeah.
I think white people of all denominations, whether you be Irish or Russian or whatever, are allowed to have that. The problem comes when you hate people, when you're in that space.
Do you see a lot of hatred from the sort of English community towards other communities?
The English don't like the French much.
Oh, well, okay, well that's different. That's,
the English don't like the French much. I know that much.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, like, do you see like English people like on TV or in politics or anything saying I hate black people? Or
no,
you know?
I don't see that. But like I was saying, the thing about this is that as somebody who's grown up black, right? He's grown up black. There is a level of paranoia that exists within a lot of black people. And the reason why the paranoia exists is because of the confusion, like I said, like the bipolar schizophrenic nature of saying one thing, doing another thing, saying another thing. So, oh, we'll abolish slavery, but we'll get your continent.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll be cool with you, but we'll take all your resources. So it's like, okay, listen, I don't want to be paranoid, but that is not consistent. Okay, it's not consistent in what you're saying. And so, no, I don't see white people saying, oh, I hate all black people. But then you have to look at the governmental structure and say, okay, well, what are these governmental structures doing in these black countries to these black people with the black resources? Because the world lives off Africa. If we're honest with ourselves, like even we've got our tablets and laptops here now, it's got cobalt and coltan in it. That's 85% of the cobalt and coltan is from the Congo.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so it's like the resources of Africa fund the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So,
I know. I'm not saying you're wrong.
So I'm just saying, if the resources of Africa fund the world, are those resources always got the right way?
I would suggest they're not. And I think that the main problem is that is not imperialism now, but it's corruption, right?
Right.
So I think that one problem that I think a lot of African countries really struggle with is the fact that not just Europeans either, essentially buy off their leaders and allow them to take these resources at rock bottom prices.
Right.
And this keeps Africa as a continent very poor.
But then you have people like, I don't know if Ibrahim Traore, who's the youngest president in the world now.
Is this the guy?
From Burkina Faso.
That's it, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what
he's got a scar on his face, hasn't he? He's
got a scar.
Yeah, he looks mean, man.
He looks like he's been through some
things.
Yeah,
right.
right?
And I bet he has.
People are saying that he's like the spirit of Thomas Sankara. I don't know if you know Thomas Sankara.
I don't.
Who's like I don't know, the ancestors have come back again in him, right?
Okay,
and what it is that he's had to oust the French and stop the French from doing a lot in the country, right? And like you said, some people are saying, oh, you shouldn't do that. And I'm like, well, Jack Chirac just said what
Yeah,
that's
why
what they've
not?
been doing. He's trying to stop it. And so it's like
Honestly, I'm just hearing Brexit. That's all I'm hearing.
right.
I'm just hearing Brexit. I
Right.
don't want the French and the Germans getting our money. What is that? What was that face?
I've been silent because I'm trying to listen and learn.
Mhm.
Like that, I've heard very little I agree with. I'll be honest.
Okay,
I mean-
go for it.
go on then.
I mean, even that, I find strange. I mean, the
It's the same impulse. The desire for
Russians helping you do a coup. I mean, I agree that
the desire for self-determination is what
yeah,
underpins
but,
it.
you know,
Exactly. That's what
when
they're
they
about.
did the Brexit vote and we weren't getting it, I remember we met Korwin Mikke, this Polish politician, and his advice was go and get some generals. I mean, you know, fair enough. But I just,
So what did you
I don't know
disagree
what
with?
any of this
Yeah,
has to do with white privilege. I'm so confused.
Well, no, what you
Because white supremacy is normally implemented by a geopolitical structure. Not so much you. I'm not going to say
Yeah,
you're a white supremacist,
Like, I listened
right?
to your example, but I just don't get that either. That's not white
What
supremacy.
example?
That's just geopolitics.
yeah, but
You
that's
can do that to white people or brown people. It doesn't actually matter if you're.
yeah, but that's why the term
Higher
white
again.
supremacy isn't useful, right? Because what it is European imperium is really what he's
Not
talking
even
about.
European imperialism.
Well,
It
yeah.
doesn't have to be European.
Oh, no, it doesn't have to be. It's just
But it
in this
actually is.
particular case.
It's not. I mean, many countries engage imperialism in the past
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
now, and they
Sure.
some of them are European, some of them aren't.
Sure. I
The
mean,
big
Africa's
winners of
problem is
the-
going to be China, right?
That would be
this day and
Chinese
age, there's a lot of
imperialism.
it.
If China took over the rest of the world, it would be Chinese imperialism. You
Which it
wouldn't
will
call
be.
it Chinese imperialism. You just call it imperialism.
It would depend on the circumstances, but if they're coming in the way, say, the French did, and setting up a Chinese protectorate and whatnot, I would agree that's imperialism. But a lot of what I see the Chinese doing, for example, I disagree with the right on this, where they're like, oh, it's them setting up debt traps, etc. The Chinese are pretty stupid in this regard. Like, they're usually doing the kind of bare minimum to just extract some stuff that wasn't going to be extracted either way. So I don't think that actually fits the term imperialism. Just business.
So if China was to take over huge swathes of the world with war, with their army, would you call that Chinese imperialism?
If you do it with war, yeah.
Right. And I think that's what has happened with Africa. That's why it's called white supremacy or European imperialism, because it was done with war.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like, oh, how you doing,
Sure,
mate?
it's imperialism for the French or the British or whoever else, but the idea that it's European or white,
But they are white. It's by default,
Yeah, it's
it's
just-
what they are.
not very relevant though.
Well, it kind of ropes in people like the Norwegians and the Finns because they're also white. The problem is it's just an inaccurate category,
I get that. I understand that.
which is
Because they weren't involved.
Yeah,
They're like,
exactly.
it weren't me.
Yeah. yeah. The Latvians are just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. The
You know,
Swedish are like, oh, what
yeah,
do you-
yeah. So I can that's another problem that I have with it. It's
Oh,
just-
so what you're
lack
saying
of
is that it's
accuracy.
been lumped in with all white people.
yeah, it's a broad and thin category. Whereas if you said British imperialism, French imperialism,
European imperialism, or
broad,
but not
but again,
white.
that's quite broad because
But
there are
also,
definitely
if Europeans, let's just use that term, could do it to other Europeans, they have no problem with it and have done it. I mean, the Soviet Empire collapsed in the 90s, and those guys were imperial subjects of the Soviet Empire.
however, the reason I think this I said about people understanding what certain things are, because with white supremacy, right, came a pseudoscience, and I don't know a pseudoscience that's been used from European to European, but with Carl Linnaeus,
we did. You should see some of the 19th century depictions of the Irish.
right, with the Irish, I
Yeah.
can say you can say that with the Irish,
They did.
but
Or the Germans.
Or the Germans.
or the
yeah.
Germans, but
Yeah.
generally, if you look at, because there was Africanus,
Yeah.
Americanus, Europaeus, and Asiaticus, who Carl Linnaeus, which is a taxonomist, done
Yeah,
in the 1700s, and he categorized and said, "This is what these types of people are," and so there was a whole pseudoscience behind white supremacy. Also, it wasn't just like,
Yeah.
oh, do you know what I mean? It was a whole movement.
Yeah.
And so people have to understand that there's like a
But that's actually,
hangover from that.
but that's, I find confusing your definition of white supremacy, because in that example, it wasn't just we're different species or whatever group, and therefore
No, we're all
it's the
human.
seven. No, I'm arguing from the perspective of someone who made that chart, right?
Yeah,
They
Carl
would say
Linnaeus.
that there's 7 different groups or whatever, and they're saying that the white group is the superior group because
Mhm.
of XYZ. That's actual supremacy. Like, I still struggle with even understanding your definition of white supremacy.
So that's not supremacy.
I'm saying so the guy who sets out the 7 groups, the reason he does it is not just to be like, this is science. He also used it to say the white group is the superior one.
Yes,
That's white supremacy.
right.
That's what I would understand that term to mean. And
Right.
That's why I say,
But with what I'm saying, with that psychology, imperialism came.
It's a justification.
It's a justification for imperialism. It was used to say, listen, you see these Negroes, they're not very smart, are they?
Yeah.
Because Carl Linnaeus, he wrote it and he's a scientist and he said they're not very smart. So we can do that.
It's not quite like that though, because those justifications came a lot longer after we'd already purchased slaves and started setting up colonies.
Sorry, say that again?
So the justification for taking over land and subjugating people who weren't white because of the 7 categories or whatever. My understanding is that
that came in the 1700s, just the categorization.
I get that, but it was largely, especially in the modern context, for empire expansion used by the Americans. When it came to European powers, I mean, we were engaging in slave trading on the basis of race for a lot longer before.
From the 1400s.
But the counterpoint to that is almost any theory is a post hoc rationalization of existing practices and beliefs anyway. So it's kind of natural for a conquering people to think of themselves as better than anyone who's they've conquered.
Well, the Russians need to take care of the rest of the Slavic world.
Absolutely.
It's not unusual.
So, but I mean, after the fact, to justify why you were able to do that, you create a series of theories.
But am I correct in thinking that you're saying that the European imperialism that happened is not part of what you would call white supremacy? It wouldn't be, or it would be. Because I'm a little bit confused.
Depends on the circumstance. Because take the Americans, for example. I mean, their history is very different, but they're still of Anglo-Saxon stock, like 90% or whatever it is. When they would justify getting rid of the Indians, I mean, yeah, that's on the basis. They use racial theories for this, not just that they're savages and need to be moved on. In the later years, especially, they use the white supremacy stuff. But if you're just doing it because of geopolitics, like the bloody French are going to take huge swaths of Africa, so we need to move in and take what we can as well. You're not doing it because you necessarily hate black people. You'd happily do that to a white nation as well, if it meant that you could get one over on the French.
Well, I would say this as the psychology of believing that you are superior to another group of people was a major factor in holding the Berlin Conference.
Yeah, I have
it's a major factor.
It's not that you're wrong that we would happily conquer the French had we the power to do it. But when it came to, in particular, the 19th century and scientific theories of race, there was definitely an element of white supremacy in there.
Sure, this is quite late in the game, but also it wouldn't necessarily just apply to Africans. So the difference between the African continent, you say sub-Saharan really, and the Europeans is just a level of technology and civilization at that point. That's why they're able to even do such a thing.
Right.
And if you could do it to Greece at that time, yeah, they'd probably happily do it. I mean, the Turks did it to all of the Balkans for that period, and the Soviets did it to all of Eastern Europe over that period. The white component, I just don't think is actually that important.
I think it was quite a driving motivation.
I don't think what. Sorry, go on, Carl.
No. It was quite prominent in the theorizing around it.
It's a weird justification because you get it with the Americans too, where suddenly the Spanish and their descendants become not part of the white race because you need to steal their colonies. You understand what I'm saying?
No.
So you're happy to take control of other colonies, and if you can use a justification for why you need to do it on the basis of race,
you can.
People will do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's not the only reason you do these things, and the history of each of these places is so vastly different. But I think saying general things really doesn't usually reflect reality.
I'm just trying to understand if you think that race is tied into this. So you don't think race is tied into
in the case of Africa?
In the case of Africa, I think race was tied into it.
It definitely was.
Most of it, yes.
Okay, I'd say I don't think.
But there are no. But
really,
you are right.
There might be instances where it wasn't.
Yeah, but you are right.
When it comes to Africa, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but you are right when you say, look, essentially, it doesn't really matter what justification people give to, there are lots of different justifications, and we'll justify doing whatever we need to do, which is what everyone does. So
you find a reason to do something.
Exactly.
Oh, you know what? He's got blue eyes. Don't like blue eyes.
Yeah, exactly.
You just find a reason.
Sure. I mean, these things exist, but it's different in the sense of, in my mind, when I think of Nazi Germany, for example, like Hitler's worldview is incredibly important to why the Nazis do what they do, the countries they even target, and the strategy. And that's because he's a dictator. He's literally able to implement his worldview in that way. But when it comes to something like global empires, not only is it a huge time span, there's different things going on throughout all of that time span. There's different regions. The considerations are different in different places. Like one of the things you said about this was done to the Africans, that Jacques Chirac quote. Like it's very unique to the French colonies. because it's the French experience of colonization.
The British didn't do it?
The British have a different way of doing things.
Cecil Rhodes was pretty racist, though.
Oh, absolutely. But it's the same thing with the...
It sounds like you're trying to run from it. It's like, it is what it is, right?
No, I'm trying to explain that I don't like saying general things for something that's much bigger than a general statement. So the Congo, for example, is the greatest example of probably the worst case of colonialism ever implemented.
Leopold.
I'm trying to think if I don't know, you could argue like the Muslim Empire might have done some things at worse.
They definitely did in North Africa.
Genghis Khan.
Castrated the Africans.
Yeah. Well, it's East Africa that really suffered from Muslims.
All I'm trying to express at the last point here is just...
Still got the slave forts there in East Africa with the Muslims.
Yeah. The only point I'm trying to express at the end of this is just that I don't like saying general things because usually it's very specific to the place.
Okay.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content on the site, such as Brokenomics series, which this episode is looking at your mum. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.